Michael O'Flaherty, you're the director of the Fundamental Rights Agency. You're here in the Parliament today to talk about NGOs. What message did you have for members of the European Parliament?
The message today was that civil society in Europe, much more than NGOs, it's also the academic world, it's the media, it's faith communities, are under pressure. They're under different types of pressure right across the 28 member states, but it's time to act.
Fidesz party has been very successful in Hungary. There is a possibility, there are rumours that he is going to crack down further on NGOs and on their freedoms. Are there countries that are of particular concern?
The interesting thing we found from our research is that there are problems everywhere, and it's really not helpful to focus on just this country or that country. Financial pressures, regulation pressures, lack of access to the decision makers, even downright thuggery. We find it in too many places. So let's deal with this as a European problem.
There are sectors of the NGO activity, I don't know, working with Roma communities that face particular challenges.
Yes, there's certainly the case that in different places, depending on what you work on, if it's popular or not popular, you'll get an easier or a worse time. So in some parts of Europe, if you're working on, let's say, LGBT issues, you won't be as well received. But I could make many other examples. Migration in some parts of the European Union. But the main issue is not about a targeting based on themes. It's about the underlying regulations. It's the lack of access to money, or at least to enough money to do their jobs. So we have to wake up to this in Europe. Our civil society is under threat, and it needs action now.
What does the European Commission need to do, or is this principally an issue for individual member states?
It's about both. The EU itself can make its access to its funding a bit easier, the reporting a little bit less burdensome. It can look at funding core costs of organisations. It tends to typically just fund projects. At member state levels, the states have to be very careful when they, for example, develop a counter-terrorism law. It's not intended to clamp down on civil society, but sometimes there is that unintended consequence. So careful vetting at the national level of draft law is one of the many important things that are needed.
The European Parliament are considering putting forward the idea of a fund for organisations working on values. Would you welcome this initiative, and what should it look like?
Well, of course I welcome it. I think it's excellent. We have the anomalous situation right now that if you're working outside the European Union, you can benefit from generous EU funding for the promotion of such values as human rights. We don't have an equivalent inside the EU. This is creating real problems for many organisations in many places. So I know it's a big challenge, it's a difficult thing to deliver, but if the EU institutions were to put in place a new funding instrument for the promotion of values, including human rights, inside the EU, we would see that as a major achievement.